So this is a bit of a fireside chat. I think actually a bit of a fire would be quite good actually. But anyway, so stay warm, keep your coats on. The heating is on and we will warm up over the course of the next hour. My guest this morning, our guest, is Steve Braunias. And I'm going to talk about you as if you're not here, so just buckle up.
I will leave.
Steve Braunias is an unusual rooster. He is a rare breed of writer. He's more observer than journalist. He has managed to navigate decades of precarious employment, surviving as a full-time writer despite the odds mostly. His work has appeared in the New Zealand Herald, the Sunday Star Times, the Listener, the Spin-Off, and currently he is residing at Newsroom, where he is the reading room editor and where The Secret Diary of column has just re-emerged, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Steve specialises in the satirical diary and the insightful profile. He writes not so much with a pen as a scalpel. And you might want to ask Todd Stevenson, the ACT Party's arts spokesperson, about how that feels. For those of you that didn't read it, Mr. Stevenson was one of Steve's most recent interviewees. The resulting profile was headlined, "Ex-art spokesman once watched a musical." A scornful interview with ex-art spokesperson who knows next to nothing about the arts. And that particular article and profile went on to prove that point. And then there are the books. Steve has published a diverse range of fiction, or non-fiction, How to Watch a Bird, Fish of the Week, a number of books examining some of New Zealand's most notorious crimes, and even a book from Antarctica. As a book editor, he is a consistent champion of other New Zealand writers. Now, I recently reread this little gem. This came out many years ago, I think 2008, something like that. It's called Roosters I Have Known by Mr. Braunias. It's a slim volume of economical profiles of notables that were all published in the Sunday Star Times during the year of 2007. And this is what he says in the introduction, which I really like. He says, "You could say these are the confessions of a travelling pessimist. What was my own sense of purpose during these 27 weeks?" Because 27 weeks, 27 profiles. "I was a harried, fretful sort of rooster, needing to find fresh blood each week. The work was claustrophobic, week after week of the same rigid discipline. First catch your rooster, then sometimes roast them alive." Please welcome Steve Braunias. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Linda, and thank you for that economical introduction. And thanks so much for everyone for coming, and thank you to the Featherston Booktown Festival for having me along. It's been fantastic. You've got a very original program. It's very inventive, and I think you can really tell the success of a festival, not so much really by the events, but by the friendliness of the people in the town, and it's been super friendly, so thanks a lot.
And here's the thing. When I read your writing, I'm not expecting that the first thing that you'll say or talk about is friendliness. Am I being unfair?
Very unfair.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a very friendly, laid-back, optimistic, pleasant, bland kind of fellow.
And a liar.
Well, it's clearly defamatory. I need a lawyer.
Let me get you one. Let's start at the beginning, just ever so briefly. Is it true that you were initially turned down from journalism school?
Yes, that is true. Several times, in fact. And the very last time they said that I was on the waiting list. And about 2 weeks before the journalism course was due to begin, and my life and career seemed to be going absolutely nowhere, a man with a very disappointed voice phoned up and said, someone who we really wanted to do journalism has got glandular fever. So would you? And I was delighted. And I've always thought very fondly of whoever it is who had glandular fever.
Yeah, they're probably millionaires.
That kind of reluctance was a feature of my year at journalism school, where they plainly loathed me. And but I did have one champion among the tutors who now lives in Masterton, a guy called Carl Dufresne. And he was a visiting tutor. He worked at the Listener magazine. And he dealt with me and the class. And he told me many years later that the head tutor said to him, so, you know, who do you think is going to be something from this year? And he said, oh, I think it's Steve Braunias. And they said, you're fucking nuts. So thank you to the person with glandular fever and Carl Dufresne.
Why did you want to be a journalist?
Oh, because I read. I read a lot of non-fiction and wanted to write like that. And
yet where you've ended up, I guess, well, I said in the introduction, you're more of an observer than a journalist. I mean, the two are not, I mean, you need to be a good observer to be a good journalist, but it seems to me in the development of your writing and where you've created a kind of niche for yourself in the profession, it's kind of a journalism. Well, it is journalism, but it's different journalism, right? Because it's more observation than journalism.
I don't know. I would kind of entirely and absolutely disagree with that. I just think it is entirely a journalism. I remember years ago when I started writing for the Listener magazine, and back then a one-page story was 850 words. And I was being commissioned a lot of one-page stories, and I loved the economy of that. And I remember when I started to writing that, I had a metric in my head that in those 850 words there had to be 70 or more facts. And I would write them down on a piece of paper. And it was a matter of, you know, there's that whole sort of a really disagreeable, cynical view of journalism, which goes, you know, why let the facts get in the way of a good story? Now, only idiots and cynics say that. You can't have a good story without the facts. And so, yeah, I certainly think that when I was performing that exercise, that it was utterly a journalism, and that all these facts had to be completely accurate. And then it was a matter of a difficult matter of creating some kind of narrative around that. And really, that's essentially what I do. I don't count the facts anymore. I'm very, very fast as a writer these days, but it's still that same metric. I don't write a story unless there's a whole bunch of facts in it. So to me, that's completely journalism.
Let's talk about the fearlessness of your writing, because if you look at, say, the profile of Mr. Stevenson, poor Mr. Stevenson, or even you're writing this very week about Liz Gunn appearing in court. It comes with age and experience, but there's a confidence and a tone that you have developed that where you do make judgments about people, and you do that in a very, well, I would say, fearless way. Are you conscious of that?
No, not really. I think what I think when I'm writing, mainly, I mean, you think a lot of things while you're writing, but main thing is that I just think about the writing. And is this a good sentence? And is that a good sentence? And do those two good sentences, if they are good, go together? And is it telling a narrative? And am I being, I really think what I'm thinking is, am I being honest to the writing and to the prose? And I suppose in that does lie a kind of a ruthlessness, in as much I'm not really thinking of, say, Todd Stevenson's tender sensitivities. I'm thinking of how this looks as a piece of writing that I'm the first reader, you know, and I don't even really think about other people who are going to read it, you know. I'm just thinking of how I'm appreciating the story as the person who's reading as I'm writing it. And is this good? You know, is this okay? Is this the best that I can do? And I guess in that, yeah, there is a kind of a psychopathy in a way. My thoughts and feelings about the person who I'm writing about are quite secondary. And then I'll write it. I'm reading it furiously as I go. And then when I've finished, and I never rewrite, never ever, and I only ever start at the beginning and finish at the ending, never move things around. That would seem to be crazy. It's only sort of afterwards when it's published, and that's when a story takes on a new kind of existence to me. And I think I start reading it like everyone else and going, gee, that's pretty rough.
So you do get writer's remorse, do you? Like, do you do? I mean, the words you used in the Roosters book, which I love, is this idea of roasting your roosters alive. But do you ever think that one was overcooked?
Yeah, writer's remorse. Yeah, that's a good one. I haven't thought of that as a phrase. That's definitely true. I mean, I remember during that series and the stories and Roosters I have known, and they would be published first every Sunday in the Sunday Star Times. And Sundays were kind of hell for me because there would be a fresh roasting of somebody, and I had written it, which seemed kind of extraordinary. Because I just, as I say, this very bland, agreeable fellow who seems to be writing these executions constantly and then going back for more. Bizarre.
The bizarre thing would be if someone who'd been interviewed by you came back for more. That would be truly bizarre.
Yeah, true, yeah. I mean, I don't exactly have a contacts book.
I want to talk about one of the profiles in the Roosters book because it will bring us into it's a nice sort of link bridge between that kind of writing and your crime writing. There's one of the profiles in the Roosters book is about Louise Nicholson and
Louise Nicholas, yeah.
Louise Nicholas, who of course is the woman who made the allegations about the 3 police officers. Now, your writing about Louise is different to everyone else's writing about Louise, and I'm not going to give that away. I want you to talk about it. You have a different take on that case and on her than any other writer I have read. Tell me about, well, let's start with the meeting, the time that you met her.
Yeah, this was after the trial of what's that disreputable
Shipton.
kind of law firm called Rickards, Shipton and Sholem, and they were each found not guilty in those charges against Louise, which came. I attended that trial. It was a very long trial. It was very intense, as trials routinely are. Extremely intense, extremely upsetting. Exercises. You'd be mad to commit a crime, end up in court being torn apart day after day and having your family come along and having them suffer. So don't do it. I'll be there for a start. But yeah, at the end of they were found not guilty, and there was, pandemonium and great disturbance that a great wrong had been committed, and perhaps it had. But as somebody who sat through the actual trial, and as Linda very well knows, a trial is only based on the evidence and what is presented before the jury. And so based on that evidence of day after day, there was no doubt that this was, based on the evidence that they heard, that this was a correct verdict. I wasn't shocked at all. I would have been surprised if they'd reached another verdict. It was very brave in a way. I don't think if you held that trial today, well, for a start, it would be presented much differently. But I think if you held it today, there's not a chance that they would be found not guilty. And I wouldn't weep about that. They were plainly bad people, especially Shipton and Sholem. Rickard's not so much. Anyway, I think a few days after that, I went to the Hawke's Bay to interview Louise. And wrote the story in that book, is it? Mm. Yeah. She was staying at the home of a journalist who was the chap who first broke the whole really shocking news about Rickard's, and he had become her champion. And so she had gone to stay with him after the verdict to kind of recover. And I found them both fairly intensely unlikable people. Of course, only she knows what went on, and if she says what happened, then you have to believe her, and you don't argue with that. But, I found their certainty about their presentation unlikable. I found them as people kind of unlikable. But the strange thing is that the strange, really good thing is that as a result of that trial, Louise has gone on to do fantastic work. Hugely important work. Work that this country has made the country a lot better. I just think it's kind of an irony. I think it might be based in a kind of a falsehood from her own experience and in that trial, which certainly, going by the evidence, the charges against these men and what they did to Louise were unproved. So yeah, it's a strange irony, but I mean, she's definitely a very impressive person, hugely determined, and the work she's done has been crucial. I think it's changed New Zealand a lot for the better too.
That experience of sitting in courtrooms, which you do a lot of, and your crime writing is what most people would know you for, I guess. What do you learn about our community, our society, from sitting in the press benches of a courtroom?
Oh, yeah. I think it's a very good a court trial, a criminal trial. It's a very good way of understanding who we are and where we're at, and what kind of people we are, and the kind of terrible things that we sometimes do. And it can happen pretty much to anyone. We're all capable of shocking acts. There's that famous quote by William Burroughs where he says, no one owns a life, but anyone who can pick up a metal frying pan owns death. And so, yeah, I've followed a lot of people who've picked up metal frying pans, and they sit there with their family, who are entirely blameless, and they sit there with the family of the victim, who are caught up in this. And sometimes really beautiful things happen. I attended a case last year where it was a methamphetamine trial, and a man had been shot in the head at point-blank range, and 3 people were co-accused of this. So the families of the 3 accused came along, as did obviously the family of the man who had been killed. And at the end of it, the verdicts were varied. Some were guilty of some things, some were not guilty of other things. And when it finished, I went out into the courtyard, and the families of the 3 and the families of the victim were all standing in a circle holding hands and basically chanting about forgiveness and moving on. And I hadn't seen anything like that before. I thought that was really quite extraordinary, really quite beautiful. It's normally a sad and dismal exercise in resentment and bitterness and blame and accusation and lock them up and jail's too good for them, this kind of thing, which are totally all understandable. But this one was different. This one was really quite amazing and beautiful to watch. And I think that says something too about the society we live in. A court case, a court trial doesn't just tell you about evil or about badness or the way a society comes undone. It tells you other things too, which are actually really lovely.
Let's talk about Mark Lundy, because you've written a lot about Lundy, and you've spent time with Lundy, which few people can say. So talk to us about how you came to sit on a porch eating gelato ice cream with Mark Lundy.
Yeah, we went out for a real fruit ice cream in Kumeu, north of Auckland. And there were quite a few people sitting there eating gelato ice creams. And after we showed up, there were not that many people there sitting eating gelato ice creams. They all got the hell out. I spent a little bit of time with him between his trials. As you might recall, he was found guilty in his first trial, and then the Court of Appeal ordered a retrial because a lot of new information had come to light. And that was a really good decision. The first trial was comical, really. It was absurd. It was crazy. It was all based on this thing that most of you will remember, that he managed to drive from Petone to Palmerston North in seconds to kill his wife and child, and then to drive back at 7 p.m. while they were watching Shortland Street. It was a crazy theory, and they convicted him on that. For the retrial, I think it was a matter of 3 or 4 days before the retrial was due to begin, the Crown said to defence, "Oh, look, by the way, we're not going to argue that. We're going to say he did it at 1 a.m. And the defence were absolutely knocked for 6 by this one, and only had 3 days to prepare for that, and crucial other changes as well. So it was almost like an entirely different case. They had spent weeks and weeks rubbishing and demolishing this fast accelerated drive, which no one can do. And all of a sudden, all their research and all their material was rendered irrelevant. And they had to deal with the fact that the murders now occurred at 1 a.m. And everyone kind of knew this forever, that they were killed really more likely at around about 1 a.m. Anyway, so between those trials, I spent a bit of time with a guy called Jeff Levick, who's become like a friend, I guess. And Jeff Levick is Mark Lundy's Joe Karam. And that's another subject entirely. Has anyone got a firm view on the murders of the Bain family? I'm not saying who do you think did it, but anyone got a firm view? Hands, please.
Hands up if you've got a firm view on Bain. We'll come back to Lundy.
Has anyone got a firm view on Mark Lundy? Come on.
Oh, that's ridiculous. We all
Much
know
more
you
of
have.
you do than that. Incredible. There was a much more honest audience, I have to say. When I addressed the subject in Arrowtown, some ways actually quite like the Featherston of the South. Very treey. Perhaps the income's a little bit larger. Bunch of right-wing creeps. So when I asked them for a show of hands, there wasn't one set of hands down. Everyone believed it, and then it sort of got crazy. And then I said, "Well, look, we're all among friends here. How about who believes in the death penalty again?" No hands on the lap. Now, if I had been part of that audience, if I was in two places at once, and was asked, "Do I think he did it?" I wouldn't raise my hand. But if the question was asked, "Do you think he's innocent?" I probably wouldn't raise my hand. It's a really peculiar case, this one. A lot of it comes down to the famous stain on his shirt and the famous line by the prosecutor, which was the line that really got the jury. It's a terrific line. "A man should not wear his wife's brain on his shirt." That's a pretty good dictum for a happy marriage, you'd have to think. But yeah, I met him, I hung out with him, I didn't like him, I thought he was a fairly unpleasant sort of individual, but that wasn't surprising because if he was innocent and he had spent all those years in jail for a crime he did not commit against his wife and his daughter, then you too would probably be a fairly unlikable person. So I took no stock in that. And again, just based on the evidence, though, and the retrial, I thought that was a very poor verdict. Purely based on the evidence, and I have no bias here of favouritism towards him or against him, but purely based on the evidence, I thought what was presented was a clear verdict of not guilty. Of course, that's separate to whether he actually did it or not. That's separate. And it's an ongoing story. There's more to come. You may have heard of a quango called the Criminal Cases Review Commission, CCRC. And they've been set up to investigate injustices. And one of their first cases that they've been looking at is the Lundy case. And they will be releasing a report on the Lundy case later this year. I don't know what powers they have. Linda, do you know?
I do, actually. Well, they refer it back to the government, and the government will decide what to do with it, but it'll be persuasive. There's something about what happens with a verdict. I want to read this. This is from your The Scene of the Crime book that came out a few years ago, and it's about the Lundy trial, and it says, "Trials end with a verdict which becomes law and regarded as fact. A strange phenomenon then immediately occurs in the media. Until the verdict, court reporting is typically cautious. It's stenographic, recording what was said by who. After the verdict, all bets are off. Verdict equals law equals fact, and guilt becomes absolute guilt. Suddenly, you can say what the hell you like because you know he did it." And then you take a quote from somewhere, you don't say where it came from, but you describe it as this bilge after Lundy's first trial. You're pretty critical, I guess, in how the media deals with all of this. Is it just too complicated, do you think, for day-to-day media? What is it?
I suppose I'm critical of that aspect of the media in particular, that when there's a guilty verdict, you read this bilge saying, "Oh, this person, was always an appalling monster." And you can say, like I write, you can say what the hell you like. And you still don't know, obviously, do you? No one knows what happened. but it gives you this license to pronounce certainty that they are guilty. And the obverse is true as well. When someone is found not guilty, I'm thinking here of, what the hell's his name? Right, David Bain. You might recall that in his retrial, when he was found not guilty, and he was all over the media, and he found himself in the very happy position of having made new best friends in John Campbell, who just absolutely adored him. Great to find a new friend like that a bit late in life. And also Mark Sainsbury, just absolutely loved David. And in fact, I remember an interview between Sainsbury and Joe Karam. I think it was in the hours after the verdict, and the supporters of David Bain who were there. And this was like about 10 of them. And he said to them, "Gosh, it's so great that you've got together and supported this guy. I mean, I guess you're a bit like his family." Not really.
I remember that. I'd forgotten, but that is. But that's when the whole thing, everyone loses their head, right? Because actually, what they want is the interview. Like, forget about whether they like them or not. They don't like them. They don't care. They want the interview, right? To get an interview with someone like Joe Karam, when he's campaigning for someone like David Bain, you have to, as a reporter, you have to demonstrate to Karam that you think he's right. Because someone like Karam is not going to cooperate with you as a journalist if he thinks all the way through you're on the other side, right? Everyone takes sides in those big cases.
Yeah. I think he's got quite wealthy, hasn't he? And with journalists who have not been on his side and said things he didn't like. I've had the odd meeting with him post these two trials. He got it into his head, I don't know why, but he got it into his head that I'd be a perfect candidate to write his biography. And that I should come and stay with him on Kauai Island in Auckland, in the Waitemata Harbour, for, 3 or 4 weeks. Which seems like a prison sentence to me. Can't escape from a fucking island, can you? It was, to tell you the truth, I don't really have a firm view on the Bain killings. If anything, I listened to the one time I've listened to a podcast. Is there anything invented which is more of a waste of time than a podcast? I really don't think so. Anyway, for some reason, I was for an assignment. I listened to the podcast by Martin van Benen. He's a very, very fine journalist in Christchurch, and he recorded this podcast, which I think has been listened to by over 1 million people around the world, which is extraordinary, about the Bain case. And of course, the purpose of this was to show that David Bain was the killer. And if anything, and I suppose this comes down to a journalist's sort of natural hostility to a perceived position, this instinctual need to argue it and to not be convinced. So if anything, after listening to this podcast, I thought, no, Bain didn't do it. Van Bain has got it entirely wrong.
Show of hands. Who thinks David Bain's guilty? Who thinks he's not guilty? That it's someone else? A sprinkling. His father could have done it. Yeah, his father could have done it. Why is it, do you think, some of these cases really take hold? I mean, if we think about it, it's Lundy, it's Scott Watson, the Sounds killings, David Tamahere, David Bain, obviously. What is it about these cases?
True crime, I guess. It's just awfully interesting. It's just terribly interesting to see to see what happens when people... It doesn't take long to kill somebody. It's often a matter of seconds. It's fascinating and it's interesting to see what has led to that and why and how. It's just purely, really interesting. And I think there are other more noble reasons why we're attracted to it. And I think that became, well, that presented itself to me, I think, during the Grace Millane trial. And that was a unique trial. I've not attended one like that where I've not attended a trial which has been conducted in complete silence. Every other trial, and when it adjourns, when you have morning tea and afternoon tea, there's chat, there's gossip, there's laughter, there's black humour, there's how's the weather, you know, how's the family, all sorts of things. People just chat. It's very human. It's actually, I mean, I love going to court. To me, it's like a pleasant outing. And this one, no one said anything. It wasn't just the fact that no one joked about anything or laughed, which would have been transgressive. No one said anything. It was just conducted in utter silence. And sorry, I wanted to talk about the nobility of that. I think what this said to me and why so many New Zealanders were transfixed or fascinated or interested by this case is that they cared. I think what we had was a visitor to this country, a stranger to this country and we make people feel welcome in New Zealand. That's what we do. We make people feel welcome. And we're always saying, what did you think of New Zealand? Did you like us? Are we okay enough? Do we pass some sort of test? Here, have another corned beef sandwich. And she was a visitor, and this happened. And I think people were really moved by it. And I think I think their first instinct was there for the family. It's very easy to picture yourselves in that role. I also think they were there to kind of reaffirm their own belief or conviction or feeling or affection about New Zealand, that it isn't a place where we routinely slaughter tourists, that it is a decent society. And yeah, I think there was a lot of expression of human common decency around this trial, and I found that quite affecting and quite moving, quite beautiful. Again, like I say, you know, a court trial isn't just a litmus test of where things go wrong. It also reveals good things about us as a people.
But the kind of court cases that get our attention, if you like. I mean, I totally agree with you on the Grace Millane case and why New Zealanders felt so connected to that particular death. But without, you know, with no disrespect to that victim and her family, it was also because she was an attractive young woman and it was a stranger killer. Like, I don't know what there'll be people in the audience I know who will know this, but I don't know how many people were killed in New Zealand last year, but the vast majority of them we never hear anything about, and particularly family violence, and particularly in some communities in New Zealand, when women are killed by their partners, it's a paragraph and everyone moves on. And what we pay attention to says a lot about our society as well as what we don't pay attention to. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I don't know. I think sometimes we can, there's just so much we can take, you know. One example is this kind of vile New Zealand pastime of abusing or outright killing children. For the longest time, I had nothing to do with those trials, and it was a very deliberate decision. I'm not attending those. That's not my idea of a pleasant outing at all. And then last year, I found myself reporting on 2 back-to-back. And that sort of changed something in me, I think, and the way I feel about reporting on court trials and writing about what happens to these people. And I think the result of that is that I've got a new book due in around about July. It's called The Survivors, and it's another sort of collection of crime stories. It's the third that I've done, and the final that I've done. So it's the third and final book in my trilogy of true crime writing. And the reason it's the last one probably comes down to those 2 trials that I attended last year. I just thought, I can't do this properly anymore. So I'm not going to write any more books like that again.
And why can't you do it anymore?
It's just too much. These were two trials of very small children, infants, battered to death. Very kind of similar circumstances. The accused in both cases was a male who was not the father of the child, which is, again, another sort of classic feature. And it didn't take long for them to kill them, a minute, not much more than that. And then they've got a lifetime of remorse and disgust at themselves and so forth, and what their family think of them and what their friends think of them. So you're sitting in court listening to this, and you're listening to a great deal of forensic detail about how the infant was killed, and that's why I hadn't gone to any of those before. I've got a 17-year-old, and I probably started, I really didn't start reporting on court trials until about 17 years ago. Although there had been a period, a couple of decades before, where I was the court reporter at the Greymouth Evening Star, working alongside Sue in the front row here. And yeah, I didn't take it up really properly until I joined the Sunday Star Times. And it was just as I joined that paper that my daughter was born, and that could be no coincidence that I decided that I would not attend any child killing trials. And I guess I felt stronger about it and okay about it, and it's just a professional obligation. And so we went to see these 2 last year, and I regretted doing it. Didn't do anything for me. I didn't gain anything from it. And yeah, so this will be coming out soon as the final book in that series, which I'm not sure I answered your question, sorry.
I think if it makes you feel better, that your coverage of those cases did give a lot to your readers, because one of the things that journalism can do is it can shine a light into dark spaces. And I think if you think about, your observation about the pastime that we have in New Zealand, which is that we've got this terrible family violence record and this terrible record of child abuse and child killing, that actually, until we shine more of a light on it, we're probably never going to do anything about it. Certainly not doing very much about it now. Let's pivot, because we haven't got much longer, and I want to give you a chance to ask this very erudite human being a couple of questions. The Secret Diaries. The Secret Diary of column, which has run for, is this 10 years?
About 12, yeah.
And in a variety of places. So it just got cancelled by the Herald. Like, what did you do to the Herald? Everyone likes reading this, so why don't they like you?
Yeah, it was a curious decision. They said it's not personal, which immediately makes you think
Which
it's
means
fucking
it is,
personal.
yeah.
You know, in fact, I said to the guy, I really appreciate your impersonal call. Oh, it's just cost cutting. You may have noticed that there's a few things like, News Hub being cancelled, Sunday, fair go. This is a very bad time for journalism. The Secret Diary was among a number of other columns, at the Herald, which were axed. But the good news is that, the paper is held on to columns by Mike Hosking and Heather Duplessis Allen. So it's really great that they're continuing in the Herald, which is essentially a left-wing organ, as you know. That came as a bit of a surprise, really. I said, gee, I predict that there'll be a number of people who won't be happy about it. And indeed, when I wrote in the Herald, look, this has been axed, this is the final one, I was swamped with emails from people saying I've cancelled my subscription, which I thought was that was a curious decision of theirs. But you've got to cut costs.
But you live on, and it's now on Newsroom.
Yeah.
And the purpose for the column, if you haven't seen it, the diary, if any of you haven't read it, is it's a satirical poke at the powerful, basically. So how do you decide whose diary you're going to be each week?
You just see who's been in the news that week. It's basically, my definition of the Secret Diary is it's a chronicle of the wretch of the week. Luxon is a sort of regular wretch. Hipkins would be a much more regular wretch, but for the fact that there's a phenomena that every time you write about Hipkins or put him on TV, no one watches or reads it. He's that loathed. It's more than a loathing, really. It's just a kind of a distancing. No one wants to know him. So that's a bit of a shame, because I often get sort of emails from readers going, why are you all sticking it to Luxon? Why don't you stick it to Hipkins? And you say, well, I have occasionally, and no one's read it. No one wants to know. But I was very fortunate in as much that 24 hours after the Herald axed it, it's gone to Newsroom, where I already work as the books editor, and it's not behind a paywall. So the Wretch of the Week continues. And I write them very swiftly on a Friday morning, almost entirely without feeling for that person who has been chronicled. It's a narrative, It's got a set routine. It goes from Monday to Friday, and so that's the rules. That's the structure of the narrative. What happens between Monday and Friday, and it was lovely. Actually, I was walking along the street yesterday, and a lady ran over and said, "Oh my God, you're my hero. I've been teaching the Secret Diary to my English class for years and years and years." Ah, there they are. Hey, thanks for that. That really made my day. How lovely to think of the youth of New Zealand having to study a satirical series on awful people.
Do you, you described your writing process before, and you write it sort of beginning to end, but, when you read it to yourself, do you make yourself laugh?
No, and no. Once I've finished it and sent it, I don't read it again, ever. And so when you were reading out the introduction from the Roosters book, it's not bad, I didn't mind that. I thought that was okay prose, and that's the thing, Linda. Before, I can't be too disingenuous about it. I can see why you would say I don't write so much with a pen, but a scalpel, and I get it. But to me, it's just prose. It's just looking for good sentences and good sounds and really good images and trying to be really honest within that. But to me, it's just, non-fiction writing to me is to me personally as a reader, is the best kind of writing, because here's the chance to really compose the best kinds of sentences. And this is the kind of reading that I did, which made me want to write like that. I would read like the book reviews of Dorothy Parker, and every sentence is like epigrammatic. It's just so superbly composed, and you think, that's what I want to do.
Questions? Anyone got some? Have we got some questions from the floor? I've certainly got plenty more questions, but, here's your chance.
Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. With a murder, the act itself is severely unlikable. It's unequivocally unlikable. But that person has so many other days that they have already lived and days that they're going to live, and they're not out there hacking people to death or shooting them or strangling them. They're just going about their business in a generally often likable way. So that's a completely different thing. Politicians, well, they exist for us to dislike them, don't they? Some of them are actually incredibly likable. I really like this guy in National called Chris Pink, who is a kind of like National's resident satirist. He fills social media with the mockery of the left. No finer mockery is there than mocking the left. They really need it. Yeah, that's
good question.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? I haven't written anything about that particular case, but yeah, you've raised something really quite important, actually. Certainly, I haven't been invited to talk about my true crime writing in Palmerston North. That would be different talking about Lundy than it is talking about it here. It's something you have to be sensitive about, and it's something too that you think about when like when me and Sue worked together at the Greymouth Evening Star. What was the population? 7,000 back then, I think. Yeah, about that. And you're writing about, I was writing about court, and Sue was writing about things which are happening in town, and you're not separate from other people in a town that small or a community that small, and you do get a sense of responsibility that you can't just be silly, But yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you,
Shane.
Oh, the disappearances of
the six.
Was it 6 people?
Yeah.
On the west coast of Auckland, the west coast beaches. I guess it comes back to things I was saying earlier about you can't have a good story without the facts. I think the facts and the disappearance of those 6 people are so disparate and so unconnected that to start forming theories that there's some kind of serial killer or that these deaths are related is kind of preposterous. I just think it's 6 very unfortunate people coming to bad ends in a remote place, which is dangerous. And it's very easy to get lost in the bush, for example. And I think this is what happened to one of these victims who I write about in my next book, The Survivors, a French boy called Alois. He was not right in the head. He was suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. He went out to either Piha or Muriwai, I think. He wanted to get his mum some black sand to take back to her in France. I don't think he had any design on killing himself. I don't think he had any design on doing himself any danger. I think that he was walking down West Coast Road, it's a very windy road, towards the water, It doesn't have a footpath. It's a bit like half of Featherston. What is it with your 50% footpath policy? It's weird. Crossing the street all the time. Anyway, there's hardly any room for him to move without cars whizzing past. And I think he just walked into the bush and fell, tripped over, got lost and died there. And I think the other five, most of the other five, not all of them, most of the other five met deaths which were in some way similar to that.
That is a really nice point, actually. So for those of you that couldn't hear, the person who was talking was referring to an earlier book that Steve had done where he'd gone to kind of unusual, tiny little parts of New Zealand that no one had ever heard of, and a friend of the speakers who was dating at the time, was taking prospective dates to each of these places. They were going sort of to one place, using it as a sort of dating map. Just to round off, and this will end us, I think, on an optimistic note, which is always a good thing. One of the things that, if you're an avid reader of Mr. Braunias, you will know, is that he is a nostalgic fan of the traditional tea room. If there's a sausage roll and a club sandwich, he'll find it. What is that about? Make us feel good, just as we end this session.
The reason I'm giving the Featherston Booktown Literary Festival 10 out of 10 is because of the supper room next door. That was a very interesting insight from that person over there about that particular book, which is called Civilization, 20 Places on the Edge of the World. And indeed, I quite recently got an email from an American guy who said he's been out to New Zealand 4 times, and each time it's to go to these places that I write about. I think he's got to 17. So that book is really doing wonders for the New Zealand economy, I think.
This could be our own kind of Camino. We just did. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure. Please join me in thanking Steve Braunias.